France. In the heady atmosphere of Nazi victory, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring received an intelligence report from the United States detailing President Franklin D. Roosevelt's audacious request to Congress. America must prepare to produce 50,000 military aircraft per year. Göring, the arrogant head of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's designated successor, threw his head back and laughed. To him, the target was pure, desperate American propaganda. How could a country focused on consumer cars and Hollywood convert its heavy industry overnight into a credible threat? He dismissed the figures with utter contempt, secure in the knowledge of German technical and military prowess, believing the Atlantic Ocean provided an impenetrable barrier to any material consequence. This dismissal, born of hubris and ideological bias, would prove to be the single most catastrophic miscalculation of the entire German leadership. It set the stage for a production race Germany was destined to lose before it even began. Göring's laughter echoed the delusion that military might alone could guarantee victory, ignoring the fundamental economic power that was about to be unleashed across the sea. He failed to comprehend the inherent scalability and adaptability of the American industrial spirit, mistakenly believing it was as rigid and centralized as the Nazi command economy. At the time of Göring's dismissive laughter, the United States' current military capacity only seemed to validate his contempt. In 1939, the entirety of American aircraft manufacturing produced a mere 3,611 military planes. Roosevelt's demand for 50,000 units was a 14-fold increase, a number so vast it seemed practically science fiction. The American economy was still emerging from the Great Depression. Its manufacturing landscape was overwhelmingly geared toward civilian life, producing millions of automobiles, refrigerators, and consumer goods. There was no established, centralized military-industrial complex capable of meeting the new goal. The existing aircraft companies were small, operating with handicraft methods. They were struggling to keep pace with innovation, let alone mass production. The logistical nightmare of standardizing designs, acquiring raw materials, and tooling up thousands of miles of factory floor seemed insurmountable to most observers, both domestic and foreign. Yet, Roosevelt understood the unparalleled resource base of the nation. Its vast oil reserves, its untapped pools of labor, and, most importantly, its pioneering techniques in mass assembly. The goal of 50,000 planes was not just a military target. It was a psychological call to arms. It demanded a transformation of the nation's very economic structure to confront the growing threat of global totalitarianism. The individual tasked with making the impossible possible was William Knudsen, an immigrant from Denmark and the former president of General Motors. Roosevelt called him to Washington, offering him the role of orchestrating the nation's industrial mobilization for a nominal salary of $1 per year. Knudsen was the quintessential master of the American manufacturing floor, understanding the potential hidden within its vast scale. He was charged with applying the principles of the automotive assembly line standardization, interchangeable parts, and continuous flow to the complex, high-precision task of building military aircraft. This was no small feat. An automobile might have 15,000 parts, while a heavy bomber had over 1.5 million. Knudsen immediately began orchestrating the tooling-up process, convincing major manufacturers like Ford, GM, and Chrysler to pivot away from consumer goods and dedicate their prodigious capacity to planes, tanks, and ships. He overcame bureaucratic hurdles and the skepticism of existing aviation firms. He did this by demonstrating that breaking down complex components into manageable subassemblies of practice perfected in Detroit was the key to rapid scalable production. He effectively became the quartermaster general of American industry, laying the foundational framework for the unprecedented volume of material. This volume would soon drown the Axis powers. The greatest ally to the American mobilization, ironically, was the enemy's own arrogance. The Nazi leadership, steeped in a dangerous mix of military triumphalism and entrenched racial prejudice, consistently and fatally underestimated the United States. Adolf Hitler dismissed Americans as a mongrel race, half Jewish and half Negro, incapable of the discipline and endurance required for sustained modern warfare. This ideological blindness led them to willfully ignore concrete intelligence reports. General Friedrich von Boeticher, the German military attaché in Washington, repeatedly sent accurate and alarming reports, detailing the speed and scale of American preparations. These warnings were either discarded or downplayed by Göring and Hitler. They preferred to believe their own racially motivated stereotypes of a soft, consumer-driven society. This failure to grasp the fundamental adaptability and sheer resource base of the United States meant the German High Command never developed a cohesive, long-term strategy to counter American industrial power. They operated on the assumption that any American effort would be too little, too late, allowing the U-boats to starve Britain and Russia to bleed dry before U.S. factories could make a difference. This profound ideological error ensured that Germany fought the war against a mythical, weak America. It was not against the formidable economic giant that was rapidly preparing to crush them. Following the initial preparations, the American arsenal began to stir. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, served as the ultimate catalyst, instantaneously unifying the nation. It extinguished the last vestiges of isolationist sentiment. Factories that had been slowly retooling now accelerated to full, continuous operation. Existing aviation companies like Boeing and Consolidated were drastically expanded, while giants from the automotive industry fully committed their resources. The scale of the construction was staggering. New factories, airfields, and entire industrial cities sprang up seemingly overnight. By 1942, the output was already dwarfing pre-war figures, but the quality control issues inherent in such rapid expansion were challenging. Yet, the momentum was undeniable. The United States was not merely building planes. It was establishing the organizational blueprints for industrial warfare. New processes were developed on the fly. Supply chains were forged globally, and the focus shifted from slow, precise handcrafting to continuous, high-volume flow. This period marked the true transition from a peacetime economy to a fully centralized war machine, driven by the collective will to avenge Pearl Harbor and protect global democracy. The commitment, once a policy goal, became a patriotic imperative that galvanized every sector of society. The most potent symbol of this industrial resolve was the Ford Willow Run factory, constructed on farmland near Detroit, Michigan. It was the largest factory under one roof in the world, stretching over 67 acres. Built with the singular purpose of mass-producing the B-2 for Liberator heavy bomber, Ford aimed for an almost unthinkable goal: one Liberator bomber to roll off the line every hour. However, the initial phase was marked by chaos and failure. Ford attempted to impose rigid assembly line discipline on a product far more complex than any car. Workers struggled with the sheer size and complexity of the plane, resulting in catastrophic quality control issues, with failure rates reaching 50%. The factory floor was a scene of congestion and frustration. Critics loudly proclaimed the project a failure, a costly symbol of overreach. Henry Ford himself remained stubborn, insisting on the primacy of the assembly line. The engineering challenge was immense, transforming a custom-built aircraft into a standardized, interchangeable product capable of being built by untrained labor. This early phase demonstrated that simply having massive resources was not enough. The method had to be fundamentally reinvented. The problem was not production capacity. It was the process of transitioning artisanal skill to scalable engineering. The turnaround at Willow Run became the definitive case study in American industrial genius. Engineers abandoned the strict, monolithic assembly line structure initially tried and instead broke the complex B-24 into numerous manageable sub-assemblies. The nose, the tail which were built simultaneously on feeder lines. The massive components would then converge onto a final, moving assembly line. This modular approach, combined with meticulous redesigns to simplify parts and facilitate interchangeability, overcame the early setbacks. William Knudsen's vision finally bore fruit. The automotive process was successfully adapted. The output began to climb dramatically. By early 1944, Willow Run was operating at full capacity, successfully producing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, running 24 hours a day. The factory alone churned out over 8,600 bombers during the war, a total volume that surpassed the entire strategic bomber output of Germany's Luftwaffe production during the same period. Willow Run was no longer a monument to failure. It was a roaring testament to the adaptability and sheer force of American manufacturing power. proving that the scale of its production could indeed overwhelm any adversary. The success of the massive production drive was powered by a radical transformation of the American workforce. This transformation largely dismantled the Nazi stereotype of a soft, incapable population. As men were drafted into combat roles, the factories were filled by millions of women, famously symbolized by Rosie the Riveter. Women, who accounted for less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941, surged to constitute 65% of the sector's labor force by 1943. They often proved to be better suited for the precision work of riveting and electrical assembly than the men they replaced. Furthermore, the war effort necessitated the integration of African Americans and other minorities into jobs from which they had been previously excluded. The sheer demand for labor shattered many discriminatory barriers, creating a diverse and highly motivated industrial corps. Rose Monroe, the inspiration for the iconic Rosie image, epitomized this effort, driving 3,000 rivets per shift with exceptional accuracy at Willow Run. This mobilization highlighted the strength of a democratic society. A unified purpose unlocked vast pools of untapped human potential, creating an industrial synergy that no totalitarian regime, relying on forced labor, could ever match in terms of innovation or sheer output. As the aircraft poured from American factories, the material superiority began to manifest brutally in the European skies. The shift was simple, undeniable, and based on the mathematics of war. Hermann pilots, initially far superior in training and experience, realized they were engaged in a hopeless battle of attrition. For every American bomber or fighter shot down, 3, 4, or even 10 replacements were already being manufactured. The chilling reality hit home during raids like Black Thursday over where the U.S. 8th Air Force lost over 60 B-17 bombers. Yet, due to the unprecedented output, the Americans were able to replace those losses within 2 weeks. The German High Command, by contrast, struggled to replace any significant losses, eroding their operational strength day by day. This was the true genius of the U.S. effort. Production was not merely supporting the war, it was an offensive weapon in itself. The ability to absorb massive losses and immediately replace them shattered the morale and strategic planning of the Luftwaffe. It fundamentally changed the calculation of risk for every engagement. The air over Europe was slowly but surely becoming an American lake. The final, staggering numbers cemented the victory of the American industrial effort. In the year 1944 alone, the United States produced an astonishing 96,270 military aircraft. This single year's output exceeded the total number of military aircraft produced by Germany throughout the entire duration of the war, approximately 94,677 units. The quantity was matched by quality and technological innovation. While Göring focused on defending the Reich with hastily designed interceptors, the U.S. introduced advanced machines like the pressurized B-29 Superfortress, a platform so advanced it changed the nature of strategic bombing in the Pacific. Furthermore, the production was not confined to aircraft. The same factories also poured out millions of tons of steel, trucks, tanks, and landing craft, all standardized and mass-produced. The overwhelming scale of American production meant that any localized German success was immediately needed. It was negated by the tidal wave of material arriving on the front lines. The Allies could afford to be materially wasteful because their factories simply could not stop producing, providing an inexhaustible supply line that shocked German commanders into resignation. Facing this overwhelming material reality, the German military establishment retreated into a desperate and ultimately futile fantasy. Göring launched the ill-fated Jäger fighter program, demanding massive increases in interceptor production, often relocating factories underground or into tunnels to escape Allied bombing. This decentralization and reliance on increasingly desperate measures, including the systematic use of slave labor, severely hampered efficiency and quality control. Aircraft, like the Me-262 jet fighter, revolutionary in concept, were plagued by poor construction, shoddy materials, and a crippling lack of trained pilots and fuel. The forced, desperate production methods could never match the systemic efficiency of the American assembly lines. While American factories were constantly improving designs based on combat feedback, German innovation was strangled by constant relocation and the inevitable political infighting among Nazi leaders. The result was an increasing output of poor quality, unreliable machines that failed to stem the tide. The reliance on fear and coercion ultimately proved inferior to the innovation and motivation of a free workforce. The ultimate testament to the decisive victory of the production war came on June 6, 1944. D-Day. The invasion of Normandy could only have succeeded under a total umbrella of Allied air power, a dominance that was entirely manufactured in American and British factories. On that day, the material disparity was terrifyingly clear. The Allied air forces fielded 11,590 aircraft in support of the landings. In stark contrast, the Germans were able to mount only 319 sorties against the invasion force. This represented an overwhelming 36-to-1 ratio in favor of the Allies. The German Luftwaffe was non-existent as a cohesive fighting force, unable to challenge the transport planes, gliders, and escort fighters that saturated the skies. This air superiority, brought by the tireless work of Willow and thousands of other factories, ensured that German ground forces could not move by day, supplies were choked off, and the invasion beachheads were secured. D-Day was not just a military feat, it was the final, devastating manifestation of the industrial power that Göring had so fatefully dismissed 4 years earlier. The full weight of this industrial defeat finally dawned on Hermann Göring during his trial at Nuremberg. Stripped of his titles and his delusional authority, he was forced to confront the cold, hard statistics that had doomed the Third Reich. During his testimony in March 1946, he admitted that he could never have conceived that the United States was capable of increasing its aircraft production 100-fold in just 4 years. He had underestimated not only the technical ingenuity but the sheer moral and economic scale of the democratic response. The verdict, however, was best summarized in his own final, poignant. In his last letter, written shortly before his scheduled execution in October 1946, Göring penned the undeniable truth that served as the epitaph for the Nazi war effort. We were defeated not by better soldiers, but by better factories. The legacy of the production war was clear. The American industrial machine, fueled by free enterprise, innovation, and a unified national purpose, proved superior to the centralized, prejudiced, and coercion-based economy of the totalitarian state, ultimately securing the victory of democracy over dictatorship.